Welcome back to the Assertive Podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. Today, we're going to look at fair fighting rules. We're going to do that with a post titled, Am I the Asshole for Getting Angry at My Husband? My husband and I were sitting in our office, and he said with a serious face that he might have thrown out my degree certificate. I asked him if he was lying, and he said no. I said, say swear to God. And he did, kind of. I got upset, and he continued saying he doesn't know where it is, and that he thinks he gathered it with some papers and threw it out by accident. After I realized it wasn't true, I got really upset and left the room, then said, if you actually threw it out, I'd leave you. That's just disrespectful. And then he said something along the lines of, fuck you, and we haven't spoken since. I hadn't framed it, but I'm extremely proud of my degree, and he knows it means a lot to me. He also likes to poke fun at the university I went to because it used to be a college that then turned into a university and isn't considered as prestigious as other universities. I know I took it too far to bring up leaving, but this quote joke just felt disrespectful and not funny. Am I the asshole?
Can you imagine being like, I'm going to play the silliest joke on my partner? Like, I'm going to leave you. Like, whoa. Oh, man.
Yes.
This one went 0 to 100 for sure.
All right. So we're talking about fair fighting today. Tell us all about fair fighting and what that is and how do we fight fairly?
Yeah. So there's, we all kind of have conflict a little differently, and there's certain conflict that happens that can create kind of problematic conflict patterns on a future basis. So those are things that maybe cause insecure attachment. They could impact the other person's self-esteem. So basically, fair fighting rules are kind of the ground zero of while you're figuring out conflict and you don't really know what to do. These are the 10 rules that just don't do these things, and you can probably figure it out. So when I'm working with couples, especially, usually somebody comes in for anger management. Maybe their spouse says, you're really angry in conflict. You need to go to therapy. So they come in to work on their anger. And this is something I kind of say, when you're mad, you're going to get mad. You're learning new skills, but these are things that do not do. If one of these things comes up, this is your cue to pause. This is when timeouts happen. So say these are the red flags. Once one of these things happens, that conflict is shut down. That needs to end immediately. So I'm going to read out these 10 things, and these are the fair fighting rules, just the framework of not getting chaotic conflict. 1, no degrading language. 2, no blaming. 3, no yelling. 4, no use of force, which would include physical and verbal aggression, breaking things, blocking exits. 5, no threatening to leave the relationship. 6, define yourself and not your partner by using I messages and describing your own world. 7, stay present and focused on one issue. 8, take turns speaking. 9, no ambushing. And 10, fighting is an intimate process, so leave your family, friends, children out of it and do not fight in public. So the pitfall in this post was the first sentence out of her mouth was threatening to leave the relationship.
Oh.
So she took the glove off right away and went straight for a jugular. So then his response was, fuck you, which is degrading language, right? That would name calling, insulting, excessive cussing, especially if your partner's uncomfortable with that. So their first reaction, there was no, tell me what your intentions were, or, oh, he's trying to be silly, but he picked something that's sensitive to me. They both just went straight for it. So those were kind of I think the initial pitfalls in this situation.
Yeah. I would maybe even throw in no blaming. She didn't necessarily use blaming language with him, but she, to Reddit, is saying he likes to poke fun at my university. She kind of accused him of thinking less of her education because her
Mm.
school wasn't as prestigious as his.
So she was really directing that at him as opposed to the behavior or the situation that they found themselves in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I mean, they could have been yelling, you know. I think too, when
Does
one of the
anybody
rules,
calmly say, I would have left you? Like, can we imagine her saying, if you had really thrown that away, I would have left you? Like, all sweet.
like that, like motherese kind of voice. Yeah. Talk about affect incongruence. I'd be like, what did you just say? What? Yeah.
No, I imagine she had to have been yelling.
Yeah. And I guess what he is saying is he says, your college degree looks just like a piece of garbage to me,
I mean,
you
that
know?
is true.
And that's, you know, and I like to think, you know, I think also when talking about defining yourself and not your partner was rule number 6, you know, I think that she was doing a lot of, you know, immediately kind of took that a little personal, I think. And instead of saying, you know, hey, it hurts my feelings when my degree is compared to garbage. And I think, you know, that's important to me. And I would appreciate if we don't joke about that. You know, she went straight towards like I'm leaving you. This is, yeah. And I mean, if I was you know, if I was the husband, I'd be like, oh my God, I hope we don't ever actually have some serious problems because she just threatened to leave me over a joke in poor taste. Like, wow, if we ever really hit a snag, she's going to jump ship for sure. I'm not going to initiate conflict with her ever again.
Yeah. Well, into maybe his perspective, if she's never expressed how hurtful his jokes or when he pokes fun at her university, as she wrote it, is to her, he has no idea. If she's like laughing it off and then in our head thinking, God, I fucking hate when you do this, he has no idea she's thinking that as she's laughing. He thinks this is an acceptable thing to joke about.
Yeah. I say, have you ever heard of the term exploding doormat?
I'm not.
That's basically where somebody just stuffs and let people walk all over them. And then there's this kind of trigger moment of stepping on a landmine where it just explodes and it's like, whoa, right? So the trigger that she's actually distressed by is really quite minor, you know, but it's reflective of this big underlying issue that she's continued to not express. So you're thinking she's probably maybe not been really clear in boundary setting from the get-go. Yeah.
She's probably more of a passive communicator. In which it's with passive communicators, it's common to stuff. So I imagine they're more likely to be exploding doormats where they stuff and then they're yelling about things when they hit their breaking point. That happened 3-6 months ago, and you're like, this is coming out of nowhere. I thought this was done and resolved. I had no idea this was bothering you for so long. Why didn't you say something earlier? Is a phrase that's used a lot.
Yeah. Why didn't you say something earlier? Yeah, so true. And I think I have a couple clients I have to work on it started off as kind of friendly banter, you know, but sometimes jokes can really turn into passive aggressive ways of taking jabs at each other, you know, but it comes off as like this playfulness of like, oh, I'm just teasing you, but that other person's left kind of hurt a little bit. And so sometimes there's even boundary settings around joking in relationships of, I get that maybe you're trying to be playful, but that hurts my feelings. Or if you got a problem, you just need to say it because this joking thing this is not funny to me. I don't like that, you know?
Yeah.
Happens a lot. If you lost your degree, what would you do?
I would just log online or contact the university and I would order a new one. So this is actually a non-problem. He threw your degree away? Okay.
It's like a little inconvenient.
It's not like he threw your whole education away. Whatever that degree was, if it was a bachelor's or master's or doctorate, you still have that. You just don't have the piece of paper. And really, who asks for the piece of paper? Nobody.
Well, it's like being like, you can't throw away like an idea or like a concept or something, you know, like if somebody threw away like a marriage certificate, you're not divorced, or your birth certificate.
Sure, some people wish it went like that.
Yeah, man, that's really right the way this works. Let's really make more value for paper, you guys. This is the problem here. But yeah,
it's symbolic. I think that's probably what it is and why it was such a significant thing for her. It's symbolic of the work. It's something physical and tangible that you can hold and see when all of the things you did to get that were experiential.
Very true. Yeah. So disrespecting that symbolically is
Mhm.
gonna hit maybe heavier than it would in like reality. It's just inconvenient, but the
Yes.
idea behind that. And I'm thinking like we all kind of know what our partner's buttons are a little bit. I think it's a pretty poor taste to plan a joke, because you would have had to think about it in advance. You'd have to think of their reaction. This seems like overt button pressing, which I think is pretty dickish
Mhm.
behavior. Um, but again, we want to assume the best intentions with our spouse. I think that's important to do. But I think I can't imagine a world in which this would have gone well unless he really had no idea because she hadn't said anything. But that seems a little unlikely. I don't know. Who knows? But would you ever play a joke like that on your partner?
No. Would I play jokes? Absolutely. Would I throw out their degree? No.
Yeah, and I think the sought off after response of a joke is laughter. Like that's what I'm trying to get when I make a joke. I wouldn't be like, "Oh, this is gonna make her go fucking crazy. This is gonna be hilarious." Like I don't know if he thought that she would laugh, but yeah, I think that was maybe kind of mean on the front end to think that's obviously at her expense, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's so
For
funny.
sure. It's just such a random thing to joke about. As you say, he obviously knew that bothered her.
Yeah. Well, I wonder maybe and he could have a pattern of consistently belittling her, where this was maybe the straw that broke the camel's back of being like, you have disrespected me so many times. So if you did that, I would have left you, you know? Again,
Yeah.
speculation there, but when somebody reacts that big, it's like, whoa, what's going on there, I find when it talks about fair fighting, I think one of the really challenging parts of fair fighting with the passive person is because they do stuff. It's that rule number 7 is stay in the present and focus on one issue. And because passive people tend to not maybe initiate conflict when it needs
Mhm.
to, or to kind of air their thoughts over time, I call it kitchen sinking, where
Mm.
as soon as the doors of conflict are cracked, the person's like, and also everything from the last year that I've been really mad about. And so when a conflict isn't really focused on one topic, it's impossible for both parties to actually feel heard and understood because there's too much ground to cover, And so I think if you find yourself in a conflict with a passive person, to say, hey, I get that there's a lot of other things coming up. Let's focus. We need to focus on this first, and then we'll make some more space to talk about these other things. But
Yeah.
like really even having some conversational boundaries in conflict, because if she's passive, that probably comes up for them too.
Yeah. Might be a bit off topic, but I'm curious if you were able to get your passive partner to stay in the present moment, would that dissolve the conflict? Or is it, this is really minor and they have 2 things to say about this, but we're having this huge argument because those 2 things are sitting on top of 6 months worth of other things that haven't been said.
Well, I think it might depend on the conflict of what both parties are hoping to get out of it. I think the best way to de-escalate anger is to let somebody know that you recognize that they're angry and you're ready to listen, and so I think even saying, hey, I want to give you a space to talk about this, but like we got to stay focused or this is going to spiral out of control. Like let's do one thing at a time, and so they might still have some, I'm not saying that that's kind of the silver bullet to conflict resolution, but I think the more that we're dumping in there, the more that's escalating, and that's certainly not going to be helpful in effective conflict. But I don't know. How do you see that playing out in your caseload? I know you have a lot of passive communicators in your caseload.
I think they are your typical exploding doormats.
Yeah.
And I think it is really difficult for them to stay in the moment initially and use skills. And I think it's interesting. Sometimes they have to almost hit a breaking point and use a skill for that one thing. And then they'll recognize, like, I have all these other problems, but I kind of lost it with them. And maybe now is not the best time to bring up these other things. And
Yeah,
so
you're
it's this
saying if
weird process of growth that happens.
Yeah, I notice with passive people, maybe usually the maybe externalizer, and I think they say maybe it's 80% or 90% of conflicts are initiated by the female. It tends to be what
Interesting.
happens. And that sounds maybe gender conforming there, but lots of times I think what happens is somebody initiates conflict, and then the internalizer has to take some time to think about it, but then things have kind of simmered down, and maybe we're hesitant to circle back to it because it's like, well, I don't want to go rev things back up too. So it kind of feels like I need to get all of this out right now because I'm sure as hell not revisiting this, So I think you can kind of feel like this intense pressure of kind of needing to do this like resentment purge,
Mm-hmm.
where I think if they're maybe able better to initiate conflict or even initiate hard conversations, I think that's maybe where that willingness comes down to also. It feels like this urgency that when in Rome.
Yes.
Kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think, with these fair fighting rules, once one of these is broken, that's when we are agreeing to disengage. So once somebody starts dumping all this stuff in, that's showing somebody's getting amped up. So it's like, hey, we're getting really off topic. Let's go both figure out what we need from this conversation. If there's other things we need to talk about, we can talk about that in a more, deliberate time.
Yeah. You talked earlier about a timeout, and if
Mhm.
you notice you're hitting one of our fair fighting rules or violations,
Yeah.
that it's time for a timeout. You want to explain to everybody what a timeout is and how to use them effectively and appropriately.
Yeah, and I think some of this depends on the couple and their history of what makes both people safe during a timeout too. But I think in general, a timeout is not putting another person in timeout. It's not used to punish or to shut somebody else down so that they're kind of just alone with their thoughts. Basically, it's saying we're both going to take time to see where we've each made a mistake and to just calm ourselves down in general because we're at risk of being unkind. So I would say you can't learn to swim when you're drowning. So establishing fair fighting rules and guidelines has to happen when you are not in active conflict. Right. So it's maybe can sound kind of artificial when all you guys are just enjoying a dinner over wine, being like, let's talk about our structure for fighting. And that feels odd to do, but that really is how that kind of needs to play out. Because you need to already have that stuff going on before it's about to be implemented. So usually, you'd say we are going to agree upon a certain timeline. So our timeouts are 20 minutes, our timeouts are an hour, our timeouts are 2 hours. We're going to sleep on this, or like we don't go to bed mad, whatever it is that your time out of. I think if there's couples where trust is a big issue, maybe there's things like cheating or somebody's inclined to self-destructive behaviors, I think it's okay to say neither one of us are allowed to leave the house. Because I think if one person leaves and that creates a lot of anxiety for the other person, that timeout's not really effective because the other person is just spiraling in anxiety. And the other person's like, yeah, fuck them. I know they hate this, but I'm out here doing my thing right home worried, But assuming that there's no issues like that, I think it's really good to get out of the house, change your scenery, do whatever it is that you need to do to come up for air. But both parties during that time need to not be engaging in texting with each other because that's not a timeout. And both parties, the main objective is to say, I'm going to regulate myself so that I'm ready to come back here and talk about this. And some couples all use like a code word, Dr. Pepper is like, I'm just freaking the fuck out. Like, I'm going to go in the room now. And they just know what I'm saying is I'm implementing timeout. We know the parameters. And this is my eject button to go start practicing those skills. But yeah. How do you talk about timeouts?
I talk about it very similarly, where it's used as a time to re-regulate, to calm down, to reflect, and also to gather your thoughts and to really consider what you heard. A lot of times if we're ramped up and we're not fighting fair, we're not actually listening to hear. We're listening to respond to what the other person says. So a lot of times our defenses are up. Everything they're saying is kind of hitting our shield or our wall, and we're just in our head thinking of what we're going to say back. And so during the timeout, it's a time to actually take a breath. What did you actually hear them say? What were they trying to communicate to you? Did they say what you actually heard? You heard it as, I hate you and I'm leaving you. What were they actually saying? Well, this really hurt their feelings that I joked about throwing out their degree, is I think what they were trying to say.
Yeah.
And if you can't figure it out, that's on your list of things to ask them. This is a great time to write down your thoughts, write down what you want to say, write it down kindly. So if you get re-escalated, you can take a deep breath. Maybe you don't need a full timeout. Maybe it's just, give me a moment. Let me take a breath. I'm getting escalated or I'm getting frustrated. And then you say, I feel frustrated that you joke about my degree a lot.
Yeah. So you're talking like there's even intentionality of what you should be mentally focusing on in a timeout. And the objective of a timeout is to say, I need to empathize. I'm using this time to understand as opposed to being understood.
Yes, after you've already regulated. Primary purpose is to regulate. You have to calm yourself down. You
Yeah.
cannot go into timeout and then start replaying the argument. You're not going to calm down. You're going to stay escalated. So de-escalate yourself. Take a couple of breaths. When you feel pretty calm and pretty in control of yourself, then it's like, okay, what actually happened here? Let's dissect this.
Yeah. We talked about in previous posts, kind of how do we know when we're in like emotionally flooded, or how do we know when we're escalated? And like, I know for me personally is I can tell that I'm getting down to a lowered state when I can stop playing that loop of that argument and why, and digging down more into why I feel so mad and all these things that they did wrong, when I'm able to like kind of loosen my perspective and be like, where might they be coming from? What ownership do I need to take in this? If I was to apologize, what might I say? When I start thinking of things like that, then I'm like, okay, we're using this time out well. I'm getting close to being able to revisit this conversation.
Yeah.
Are there other I just use timeouts as kind of a safety net of like fair fighting rules. These are violated. This is our go-to. Do you have like another skill or different approach of, as opposed to timeouts that you would recommend?
If we're escalated, no, I recommend timeouts. Because otherwise you are going to take those below the belt jabs. You're going to say the things hurt them for the sole purpose of hurting them and feeling like you're winning.
Right.
And if that's your goal in your relationship, you probably got a little growth to do.
Yeah.
And so you need to think about the purpose of conflict is to just resolve the conflict. It's not to hurt the other person. It's to come to an understanding.
Yeah. Nobody wants to be in a relationship where somebody wants you to lose or where you want someone to lose. That's not a loving dynamic there. And two, I think that this could have even, again, escalated further. So I had another therapist call it the argument volley, like you're tossing shit back at each other. And one person has to make the decision, I'm not tossing this ball back at you, right? We're just going to drop this and let this hit the ground. And so she tossed it to him, he tossed it back to her, and then they both dropped it. They could have kept throwing it back and forth, right?
Absolutely.
Where somebody's storming out, packing their shit, bringing up so-and-so's mom and whatever. But like they both recognize, whoa, that went fast. We're going to stop that because this is a risk of going ham on this.
Even with the volley, I think one person can drop it. The other person might have the tendency to go chase down the ball and throw it again.
Oh, yeah. Like toss it the back of your head when you're walking away.
Yes. So even though you've decided to disengage, they're not ready to disengage yet. So they're continuing to just kind of talk to a wall, essentially. Or you're trying to walk away and they're following you around the house. That's a huge flag.
I hear that almost more than anything, and how problematic responses to timeout. I hear that a lot where somebody's blocking an exit. Yeah.
Or so maybe not blocking it, but just chasing them around the house, essentially trying to continue the fight when they've said, hey, I need some space because I don't want to hurt your feelings. And I know if I continue with this, I'm going to say some harsh shit and it's going to hurt your feelings. And then we're going to be fighting about that instead of what we actually need to be talking about.
Yeah, it's the male I see, but his female partner really has a hard time tolerating timeouts. He'll lock himself in rooms and she'll unlock rooms. She's kicked in doors, cannot tolerate that. That can feel scary, and that's often an element of like abuse, is not letting the other person disengage. How do you like walk a client through that when they're trying to do more adaptive patterns and their partner is not open to that?
Yeah. First, I validate the frustration, and this may be good for listeners because if you're starting to implement communication skills, most people in the world do not have these skills. You're going to be frustrated quite a lot because you're communicating at a higher level than they are.
Yeah.
So prepare to be frustrated.
And change takes time. It'll change eventually, but they're going to freak out for a bit.
Yeah. The other piece of it, for a situation like that, I might suggest to my client in a time of calm, why don't we talk to them about this behavior and see what's actually happening? Yeah. If I just had to guess, I would say there may be some abandonment issues.
That's almost always what it is.
Right? So it's like, why don't we try reassuring? I love you, which is why I don't want to say anything mean to you because I value our relationship. Because I value our relationship, I need to take 10 minutes. Maybe we drop the time of the timeout. Maybe it hours too much for them to tolerate. Granted, they should be in their own therapy to get some distress tolerance skills for their anxiety in that situation.
Right.
But if they are not there yet or they're not willing to, and you still want to engage in this relationship, we may have to do a bit of accommodation. So it's, I'm going to drop the time, 10, 15 minutes. I just want to disengage.
Yeah.
So it's short time, providing the reassurance. After the first successful time, we may still be following this framework, but the response should decrease each time from the partner because we're building that secure attachment.
Yeah, so the partner who maybe has some abandonment, they will slowly learn, oh, I don't need to smother or to trap to feel okay. This need can get met through other means, such as communication.
Yes.
Like that. And I think, I like the idea. I always suggest doing a fight autopsy, especially if a fight is a reoccurring theme of talking about like what went well, what could do better next time. Autopsy is like cause of death. Like what is these sticking points that continues to have this happen? And again, kind of reasoning somebody down when they're emotionally flooded, that can be challenging. But I think if both parties are calm to say, hey, when you continue to follow me around, that really escalates stuff. And I'm wondering if there's other things that we can, maybe I can suggest or that we can do in that time, because this is not working. Using that insight to figure out what the sticking points are.
Yeah.
I love some fair fighting. I think it's helpful. I think people want to, because everybody fights different. So I think it's hard to know what does it mean to fight well. Because I think sometimes it feels like there's any anger that feels dysfunctional. For fighting rules, give some kind of universal text of, rules of engagement, to help demystify it a bit.
Yeah. I think there's a stigma around conflict and fighting to where it has to be negative. I can have a difficult conversation with you, and we would consider that conflict. If I said, hey, Jess, when you said this, it really hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
That's conflict.
Exactly.
But I'm not yelling. I'm not screaming. I'm not throwing things. I'm not cursing. I mean, I might curse because that's just my normal communication pattern.
Right.
But I'm not calling you names. And it's still conflict. I'm still bringing up a difficult topic. We still have a difference of agreements. We disagree here all the time. That's technically conflict. But we're able to do that in a respectful and kind way. And so I think it's starting to change the way you view what conflict is. You're never going to be in a relationship where there is zero conflict. It just doesn't happen.
Right.
It's what does the conflict look like? Is it looking really dysfunctional and healthy where we are yelling and screaming and throwing things? Or is it looking functional where we're able to sit down and say, this really bothers me when you do this, and I would appreciate it if you don't. And this is not really the type of person I want to be in a relationship with.
Just because, if a listener is presently in a really intense conflict pattern, that's redeemable, right? Where as these patterns change over time, once both parties know, okay, I can initiate a hard conversation and this person can tolerate feedback without getting defensive, or I can tell this person an unmet need and they're not going to flip it and leave the house, and as these conflicts tend to go better, we're not breaking these big rules. I think it makes the initiation of difficult conversations a lot less terrifying,
Yes. And change can be one directional. One person in the relationship can implement changes. It may take a little bit longer, but naturally the other person is going to match that energy. And it's just how we are programmed. If you're yelling at me, my instinct is to yell back because I feel like I'm being attacked. And so I can't sit here and be the weak link, not yelling if you're being aggressive. Think about two dogs. One dog starts to growl. What's the other dog going to do?
Growl?
They're going to growl back. Yeah.
Or maybe they're submissive and they roll over and like pee or something. Yeah.
So we're either going to roll over or we're going to be aggressive back. And there is a third option where we can attempt to stay in control of ourselves. And initially what is going to happen is that other person is actually going to escalate because they're trying to increase the distance between the energies, hoping that you are uncomfortable enough with this distance that you will raise up and meet them in their anger. If you can do the hardest thing in the world and stay calm, they may raise up a little bit more and try again, or they may come down, or they're just going to eject and they're going to walk away.
Yeah, because systems are resistant to change, right? So like once one variable starts to change, the system's like, there's a lot less anger in the system than there used to be, and they want to get back to that state of consistency where both people are equally angry. So they are going to try to go through different tactics to get you to buy in. And then they learn over time, oh, the connection between this trigger and this behavior has become extinct. So I no longer need to have this level of anger in this system.
Yes.
I say too, A plus B equals C. A is you, B is them, C is the relationship. Even if just A changes, C's going to have to change because it just will, I hope they make up and things go better smoothly in the future, huh?
Hopefully they learn from this.
Yeah, he wants to be playful and I'm sure she likes him, so.
I would hope so. They're married.
We like to think it, So, based on all of what we learned, who do you think is the asshole in this situation?
I think they're both assholes. Nobody left here free of guilt.
Yeah.
Wife is guilty of escalating the situation, taking it from 0 to 100. She's guilty of being passive and not discussing this with her partner earlier. Or at least we think so. She doesn't necessarily say that. Maybe she had a conversation with him earlier, but we're going under the assumption she didn't. He's an asshole for joking about an inappropriate topic that I think anybody would be hurt by.
Yeah.
And feeding into her escalation by responding with the fuck you. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And it's not like both people are misusing the timeout. Nobody's reconciled. But I absolutely agree that they are both assholes, and I agree with your reasoning as well.
Yeah. What do you think our main takeaways from this one are? I know we kind of threw a lot at you guys today, but let's try and summarize it for them.
Yeah. If you guys feel so inclined, I'd recommend literally go to Google, look up fair fighting rules, print it out and put it on your fridge. There's 10 of them, right? So fair fighting rules are helpful. I'm not going to summarize all the rules, but they're helpful as a way to just kind of create safety measures that even as we're learning new skills, these are our baseline things that we are going to agree not to do. If one of these rules gets broken, that's where we implement the timeout. And we need to have a plan for conflict before conflict initiates. So invite your partner, whoever, out to a nice dinner, and you guys come up with your fighting plan, and maybe go over some past conflicts to see opportunities to do things better. And then during timeouts, be seeking to understand rather than be understood.
After you regulate.
Yeah,
I agree with that. All right. That's what we have for you guys today. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can send them to us at assertivepodcast@gmail.com. Until next time.